This is Impact Healthcare, people and strategies that are disrupting the health benefits industry. And now, here's your host, healthcare benefits industry expert and the originator of the transparent health benefits movement, Lester Morales.
Welcome back to another episode of Impact Healthcare. And, I don't know that I could be so much geographically away from this person, but he has become a friend in this business. Pete Rowe, say hello to the Impact Healthcare crowd and give us an introduction to you and your wonderful company.
Thank you, sir. My name is Peter Rowe. I'm based here in the Southwest, beautiful, sunny Phoenix, Arizona, although I'm probably not going to say that in a month when it touches 115, but that's besides the point. Our company, we manage three different ones. Arcwood Benefits Consulting is our firm, which is a benefits agency where we do fee-based consulting for employers pretty much of all sizes because we have a very diverse market down here. We have Arcwood Financial, which specializes in retirement plans for those same individual companies. And then we have HR Consulting, which really is an organization that sells time. Down here in this neck of the woods, our HR teams and our clients are struggling for time. And so that was a great addition to our trio because it really allows us to serve the employees of the companies that we serve.
Awesome. So Pete, you and I talk regularly, and there's often times where we're riffing about it would be easier to do the easier thing, right? Like, hey, it would be easier to just get up out of bed and sell and do and be normal. But that's not the life that we chose. I feel that everybody has kind of that fire in their belly that gets them up in the morning doing that. If somebody asks you what motivates you to do the harder job, what's your answer?
Stop the hemorrhaging. It's gross what is going on. I mean, if you look at just my state in Arizona, our average mean income is about $72,000. Our high earners on the average are earning $84,000. Our average premium on the marketplace is $20,000. I did a quick market study just for our groups alone, and I've got 9 life groups that have a $30,000 family premium, and I've got 1,000 life groups that have a $30,000 annual premium for families. And we're just caught in the cycle where we increasingly change benefits to shift costs. I used to have the saying that it was okay to increase the deductibles, increase the out-of-pocket expense, because then the people that are using the insurance, the ones that are actually paying for the insurance. But now, if you peel it back, we're putting people in the bankruptcy. It's just, it's not fair to them. And every time I talk to employees, I still love doing employee meetings because you get a face-to-face experience with them. And there's folks out there that are rationing insulin. I mean, this is a drug that saves their lives. And I can see on the schedule that they're buying it every other month. I mean, plan design has got to be a big part of that. But that's just a simple example, is that we have to start doing things for the employees. If we do things for the employees, reduce their out-of-pocket, improve their experience, then by all means, they're going to become better workers at the company. They're going to have less rollover, less attrition inside the firm. And they're going to stay with the employer longer, and it's a lot easier to keep an employee than it is to hire a replacement.
So Pete, when we think about that, let's fast forward. This is maybe a personal question. How long have you been in the business?
That is a personal question, sir. I am approaching 36 years.
Okay, so 36 years ago in this business, healthcare cost was a rounding error, right? It didn't even show up in the top, 20 probably in an expense P&L. And over the years, it creeps until, it gets to the point where, hey, people are spending $30,000 when they're making 85. I mean, that math just doesn't work. You are someone, and we met this way, you're someone that's always looking for what is next? What can I do that is maybe harder, but is the right answer to do? What's been your experience? Because I feel like every market is a little bit different with, are all the advisors out there, kind of doing this? And B, what's been the reception of employers that, hey, everybody else says the world is flat, and I'm coming with the world is round. How is that conversation being, perceived and accepted?
Well, if you look at our area just in general, we are the least populated self-funded market. So just from that perspective alone, everybody knows the BUCA populations, and they're strong. If I'm looking at moving from a Blues to a United to an Aetna to a Cigna, my network disruption is minimal. It's really just a spreadsheet on, figuring out who's going to come up with the cheapest premium. And it's, so when you do these exercises, my initial response was, let's see what I could use as information to leverage where they're at, because moving a company from one carrier to another carrier is disruptive. My results were surprising. I have companies out here where I'll do a pharmacy analysis and we'll find out that there's $300,000 in hidden rebates that's going back to the carrier. And so we'll expose it and say, well, we're going to either carve out or we're going to move into a self-funded environment. And the carriers are going to say, well, how about I give you a check for $250,000 to credit against your claims? Because I know that a $50,000 delta is probably your pain threshold. And sure enough, the employer's like, done, I'll take the cash. So it's been an interesting conversation with these employers. But what finally turned the tide is the impact on the employees. We've got opportunities where we put in this first tier, so we know our traditional PPO plan, deductible, co-insurance, co-pays, et cetera, go out of network. Everyone gets that. But when you insert an advocate, which actually has a conversation with a member and says, hey, Mr. Member, Mrs. Member, I know you're going to go down to the facility for this MRI because your family practice is probably owned by that same facility. Well, how about we redirect you to this freestanding one? Instead of charging the $3,700, in the claim, if you go to freestanding, we're going to charge you $700. And if you do that, then we're going to waive your out of pocket. And all of a sudden it starts sinking in, because one of the larger hurdles we found is working with leadership is that if you're looking at somebody that makes, 6 figures and above, and you're saying, well, let's increase the out of pocket to $7,000, they're thinking, okay, $7,000 is not that much. But if I'm, looking at a representative of 80% of their populations making $75,000 a year, 10% is a big number to them. And so once we started kind of having those conversations, getting it sinking in that, if we can create an opportunity where I can waive your out-of-pocket expense for any of your high-dollar claims, that's going to be a win. That's increasing your financial wellness for your employees. If they feel more secure financially, then they're going to have less anxiety. If they have less anxiety, they're going to heal better. If they heal better, they're going to be back to work sooner, and they're going to love you. So, it just, once we started having those honest conversations about how our employees are interacting with the healthcare system and what, the debt that is being created by the healthcare system, and we have an opportunity to waive an out of pocket when they're going through something that's stressful, so either for themselves or somebody that they love, or if it's just a maintenance medication that they got to take, the specialty that's a high dollar medication, driving that cost down to zero. So we have members that are paying nothing out of pocket instead of 10, 12, 15, 18% of their pre-tax income. It's a huge win. And that was the thing that really changed the conversation for us.
So I want to come back to obviously the strategic approach of that conversation, but I want to even start with the conversation. So the first time you brought this up, right, it's like, Nelson Griswold always calls it healthcare's biggest lie, right? That you can't do anything to impact the actual cost of healthcare. And obviously we'll get into some of those strategies that do, but how even was that conversation accepted? And what's the first time? And if you are sitting in front of a room of employers, what do you tell them so that healthcare's biggest lie, the thing that's been ingrained in their head for the last 20, 30 years, because it's been double-digit rate increases, let's change the plan design, let's pass more cost off, let's take some more out of, it's been the same playbook. So all of a sudden you're like, time out. Here's another way. And they're like, wait a second, why is
why isn't everybody doing this?
Right. And so
It's
how does that conversation happen? Like, talk to me about that conversation.
It's a resistant one. It's very strange because honestly, they do say if you can do this, why isn't everyone doing it? And so we start having the conversation is because the resistance is we have to go into self-funding. And if I'm talking to an employer, even if it's a 50 life employer, we have, I don't know, hundreds of employers that are 50 lives and self-funded, but a lot of them are like, oh, I can't go self-funding because there's too much risk, and that almost like shuts that conversation down. And so it's just revisiting year over year about there's fat in the system, there's waste in the system. And if we just employ sound methods of redirecting members with qualified individuals to say, hey, this is a better doc, I've got data on it, and they're less expensive, then we can waive your out-of-pocket expense. It finally starts to sink in. But I mean, we're looking at probably a 2-year cycle for these conversations because again, down here in our market, our BUCA markets are strong and there's a fear of change. I mean, I had this one example where it was one of our firms down here, and I mean, they're here based in Arizona, but they've got, I don't know, 20% of their population in different states just because from COVID, they went to a telemarketing hybrid solution, but that's not the point. And their number one, talking to the HR person, their number one problem was talent acquisition. They could not hire people. And I'm like, well, what's preventing you from hiring people? She's like, I got, my competitors across the street that are throwing these ridiculous signing on bonuses. So we go through the analysis, we find out where the rebates are, which is really no disruption. We look at how the members are actually using the facilities and what we can do by redirecting that. And we came up with a conservative number that we could save that firm about $900,000. CFO was like, I'm in. HR is like, nope. Got to have that name. I got to have one of those 4 names on that ID card so the member is comfortable. Because if I lose that, then they're going to think we have discount insurance, and that's going to just exacerbate my problem with hiring. So I
find that really funny, right? When let's debunk that myth, on here. Lots of people will combine the conversation that my health care is my health insurance.
Right.
And we know that those two things are completely different things. And Dr. Jones, yes, is in Blue Cross and United and Cigna and Aetna's, but Blue Cross or Dr. Jones participates in a bunch of other networks that client has never heard of. And
right.
You know what? Dr. Jones will also take
cash.
Like $3. So as a debunking of myth, I want our listeners to separate the fact that Blue Cross does not provide your health care. They provide your health insurance. And those two conversations need to be had separately, as Pete is giving us examples. Pete, you
right, and I think one of the going back to your question, one of the things that impacted the most is that when we started educating folks that what we call premium, the carriers call revenue, when they started making that connection and that maybe not everything is in the line for their best interests, that's where they started listening a little bit differently.
That is worth obviously saying again, right? Like the misalignment of incentives. Like I find it quite odd that as an industry, we find it, oh my God, I can't believe healthcare costs is the mess it is, when the majority of people are paying a premium to somebody who calls that revenue, who is a publicly traded company,
right,
and who needs to make sure that they keep hitting their margins and EBITDA and revenue numbers. And then we're wondering, scratch our heads, why health insurance is so expensive. And then you look at all of the major health insurance companies are Fortune 50 companies whose CEOs are all making 20, 30, 40 million dollars a year. Like the KPIs, right? It's crazy.
You track the carriers, you track the largest hospital systems, they're all for profit. And they're, if not 2, they're 3 or 3.5 times greater performance than the S&P and the Dow since healthcare reform was passed. I mean, the system's working beautifully because they're the ones that designed it.
It is not broken. It is completely designed wrong. So let's take that as our jump off. You've mentioned a couple things anecdotally of things that you have learned and implemented with clients right there in your backyard that have worked. You've mentioned things around prescriptions. You've mentioned things around, helping people steer from one place to another. Let's dig into this as an education because, you said, hey, it's take a 2-year process to sometimes introduce a concept and educate a prospect. Maybe we could use this, session, this talking that you and I are going to do to lessen that. Walk me through one of those strategies and let's define it and kind of peel it apart.
So probably the best example I can give you is that I had a client that we put in these strategies a year ago in June. They're 65 life company, 80% participation, so we're about the 50 mark of the members in there. And we went in with eyes open that this is something that's going to change the way the members are going to interact with the healthcare system. And there was a resistance. We did extra meetings. We did recordings. We made sure we were connecting to the member advocates, which were helping direct traffic. We had a town hall where somebody was crying because she was under the impression that she wasn't going to be able to get her medications filled because it just wasn't kind of, sinking in. So clearly we need to improve that communication process. But once we got her into the right spots, her medication came to her at no cost. So airdropped to her front door at no cost. So who do you think became one of the biggest advocates of that experience? So let's look at that organization now. So they've got family premiums that are about $1,400 a month. They've got individual premiums that are about $450 to $475 a month, depending upon the plan designs. They went through an acquisition. They merged with another firm, which the demographics, I kid you not, are almost mirrored. It's like we had 2 same firms. One was in Colorado, one was here in Arizona. They're both in the technology installation. So they do the high-end construction with homes, installing all the stuff that we want to have hidden between our walls. So we went from, a 60 life company to basically 120 life company and went through the entire process of the education for them. And the owner of the first company, which was willing to try this strategy a year ago, was the biggest advocate because he's like, I can't pull my members away from this because they're experiencing too many good things now. It was hard. The first 6 months were hard. The second 6 months were a lot easier. We did a comparison between the 2 different plans. Company 2 was coming in, their number 1 policy that they had enrollment in, $7,000, 100% co-insurance HSA plan. Their billed premiums were 35% higher than what the traditional PPO plans that we had on Company 1, which waived deductible, waived co-insurance, and waived pharmacy specialty medications out-of-pocket expenses for the members. So we did a study for them. Well, why are your members choosing a $7,000 deductible? Purely a premium play. 100% it was a premium play. These guys are making $65,000, $70,000 a year, and they couldn't afford anything else. And we know they couldn't afford the out-of-pocket expense. So we combined everything together.
Before we move on to that, I want to dissect that because it's such a powerful thing. Number one, what you just said is 99% of employers out there that they have used increasing deductibles, taking out more out of their paycheck, increasing cost as their number one method of lowering their expense to the healthcare equation. It's turned it into a place where that person making 70 grand has a $7,000 out of pocket in order to actually be using their insurance. When you think about that, do employers get that? Do employers kind of understand and do that math, or is it just, hey, they're just trying to look at it, in their renewal and mitigate that increase and do whatever they need to do at that very moment to get it off their desk and move on to the next one? But do people really get the fact that we are putting people in financial ruin when we do a $7,000 out of pocket. Like, talk to me about that just the conversation, but the reality behind that conversation.
I don't think that it's a direct relationship. Because and this is my fault, as an advisor, I am a huge proponent of HSA driven plans because from a tax perspective, it's always going to win. But it's always going to win for the guys I'm talking to, whether it's the directors of HR, the CFOs, the CEOs, whoever the leadership is in the organization. And it's very easy to have the conversation that sure, it's a $7,000 out of pocket, but your employee can wash not seven, but they can put through their $3,500 into the HSA and they can pick up some of the tax savings. So it helps reduce their net expense, right? Because otherwise, to pay $7,000, I'm really going to earn $9,500 because it's going to be an after-tax dollar, which just exacerbates the problem, but that's besides the point. And so I think it was an easy road to kind of justify that, okay, because we have these tax opportunities, that it's going to lessen that pinch. The employees aren't doing that. We did a study, not one employee in this particular company was contributing to the health savings account. The only folks that were doing it were the folks in leadership, because it makes sense because you got a higher tax bracket, stuff like that. And I think what you mentioned before is that it's an easy way to get caught into the renewal process because, number one, it's never an easy process to go through renewal. And if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, we have a 2% increase, their momentum is to button it up, close it up, and sign it and just move on. And this, another group that we just had, and it's a different demographic, they're more professionals, but it was the same conversation. They had a 2% renewal. This is about a 250 life organization down here. They're just basically here, they're manufacturing. And they just said, put it to bed. We got so much stuff on our plate right now, we got to move forward. And I'm like, well, let's do an analysis. So we unbundled it at the end of the day. Worst case scenario is that I had a 2% reduction if they hit max liability. Best case scenario, if that expected liability, I had a 20% reduction. So it's this, automatic pilot that, I have a good renewal, 2%. It's like my gut reaction is like, well, that just means you're probably already overpaid. And so if we just start looking at where the dollars are and how you're structured, how about we give you the opportunity to save 20% of your dollars instead of just writing a check for
I need you to say that again with that conversation, because I even remember when I was, at the firm, they spent a lot of years at, and I would actually kind of categorize my renewals in different buckets, right? If it's under 5, negotiate it and put it to bed. If it's between 5 and 10 and 5 and 15, negotiate it and kind of try to get it where it says. And then if it's over 15, okay, that's where we're in jeopardy. We got to do some work and roll up our sleeves, right? And you're looking at that. So I would think, and I want everybody to just play back what Pete just said. If you got a 2% renewal, and whether you're an advisor or you're an employer, and your first thought is put that baby to bed, just understand the reality of what that means. And so I want to back up and kind of like, Pete, help me walk through the education of this. If a group who is fully insured today runs exactly the way that Carrier did, they run at their target loss ratio, what's the renewal that they're going to get?
2%.
Good. They're going to give higher than 2%. A trend renewal, right? What's a trend?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Our inflation.
Right. What's a trend renewal there in your market?
7.
Okay. So let's just play with 7. So if you run exactly the way they wanted to, they made the exact amount of money, they ran at the target loss ratio, you're going to get a trend renewal. So when you get something less than a trend renewal, that means A, they made money off of you already that last year. And in the forecast, there is no bad weather. They don't see anything. The person who is holding the most amount of cards doesn't see anything that scares them, or they would say, oh, you've got this large claim that's on here, it's ongoing, and blah, blah, blah. They would come back with some sort of conversation there. So I just urge the audience to take what Pete just said and take that really to heart. If you get, because what we typically see, Pete, and I ask you to kind of fact check me on this, most employers only look for creativity and innovation and change when they're forced to, when their back is up against the wall and they're in a really bad situation. But the reality of it is they can get into a really nice situation when they look at those strategies, when the sky is blue and there is no hurricane in the horizon. Would you agree?
Yeah, and they get to prepare for a rainy day. Because if you're able to lop off 15% on the conservative side and what your largest, second, third largest expense is, where does that benefit you? I mean, you can use that for the compensation. You could use it for recruiting in the other client example. You know, you could use it for M&A. You know, there's a lot of M&A happening right now. Equip yourself with the dollars to make positive decisions. It just puts the company back in control. You know, instead of always kind of chasing their tail, like, well, if I have this hypothetical 2% renewal, well, then that only means that I need to bring in whatever their margin is, you know, could be $500,000 in new sales. You know, They track that in and it's like they're not connecting the dots. And something else that's interesting in this conversation is that if I'm talking to the recruiting team, they don't know what's going on the benefit side. If I'm talking to the benefit side, they don't really know what's going on the recruiting side. There's this disconnect between the two. And boy, if you can put up a program where you can talk to your recruiters to say, we have a benefit plan that's going to potentially waive your out-of-pocket expense, if, you know, for these multiple reasons, what's that going to do to the conversation when they're going through the interview and recruiting process? You know, but it's just, there's these so many multiple disconnects. I know you kind of keep on coming back as what is the conversations that we're having with these employers? And it's that. I mean, it's coming in from a consultative viewpoint of all these different variations and just finding out what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then giving them tools so they can, you know, I was on the phone with an attorney group yesterday. I'm like, well, not yesterday, but it was last Friday. I'm like, do you know what you guys spend on your photocopier? He's like, yeah, that is a rack. He's like, I can't believe how much money I pay on my photocopier. I'm like, what'd you guys pay on your last out-of-pocket expense for, say, an outpatient procedure? He's like, I have no idea. I just get a bill and I have to pay it. You know, would you rather be in an opportunity to know what things are actually one of your largest expenses instead of turning it to an unregulated credit card in your organization? I digress.
No, it's not even a digress. I want to actually take this and this black cylinder that is sitting on my desk. Let's call this healthcare, their health benefits program. This is a second or third largest expense. And I think about this often when we get all of the key stakeholders in the room. Because one of the things I think about, and I'd love for you to expand on this, is no matter which way we look at this is the single largest impactable thing that allows each of the key stakeholders to benefit in their key arena. So I'd love for you to say, okay, if you're talking to a CEO, how does doing something about this impact the CEO? And I'm going to ask you the questions. I'm lobbing up the questions. When you're talking to a CEO and you're having a conversation about this, what's that conversation with the CEO?
It's a competitive compensation package so they can bring in top talent, so he can get his vision, or they can get the board's vision completed. 100%. It's all about getting the talent in the door and giving them a compensation package.
Okay. CFO.
They know that there's only 100 cents in every single dollar, and they're being asked every single day to come up with 105 cents. And so if we can give them back 10 cents that they can redirect to another project, then that's a win.
HR.
I don't want to have people lining up at my door. It's got to be something that, you know, I am able to communicate. It's going to be easier to understand, and my employees are happy. So my employees are happy, then they're happier workers.
So the same conversation can benefit all three of the key stakeholders, and not just a little bit. Because what you said, the vision of the CEO and the board, whatever their vision is, I don't care if they want to open up a new office in Albuquerque, they want to make an acquisition, they want to buy a new plant, they want to do whatever. It takes capital and it takes good people. The CFO, the bean counter, let's go. That's straight down the middle. That's easy. And HR. This is the one that obviously changed, and I think we have to draw that bridge of the definition of insanity is thinking that we're going to get out of that rat race. And so I would love for you to talk about that word change, because you and I have had that conversation before, that doing nothing and taking $1,000 and putting it, increasing it here, or taking more out of their deductible, or taking out more of their paycheck, that is change.
100%.
We just don't feel that change. So I'd love for you to like expand on that conversation, because I know that that's part of the conversation you have, especially because of your HR suite. You guys are feeling that conversation over there.
Yeah. So it's about getting them comfortable with the aspect that because we're changing the name on the ID card. So change from an HR's perspective, just from my personal experience, is easy. It's HR is a very emotional position. They're always overworked. There's a list of things that they have to do every single day for leadership. And then they come into the office and there's 15 things they were add on top of that they weren't expecting, just based upon what the employees were doing. They're just, your number of employees minus one, multiply those two numbers together, and that's how many individual relationships you have in an organization. So from an HR's perspective, they're stressed, and you want to be able to give them space so that, number one, they feel comfortable with it. Number two, that they understand the benefit to the member. And where that really comes into is I'm going to bring back those two companies I was talking about earlier that merged together, where we got HR involved specifically because we changed it. They went from a very well-known company that has instant credibility. So if something blows up at a BUCA, everyone's like, well, that just kind of works. But, if you're putting in a PHCS or a multi-plan or a First Health Network, or even just, an independent PBM, if the same thing happens, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't believe you put me in this crap. Yeah, exactly. But we went through the process and saying, number one, your medical stress is on your employees, is their debt. Looking at their average income, they can't afford their out-of-pocket expenses, especially in this one particular instance where we had 10%, 12% of pre-tax income at risk because there's no copays, because they all drove to the HSA because it was the lowest cost premium. When we moved them over to this program, we had a $500 a month reduction for the families. That's a $6,000 raise. So we put them in a situation where that HR individual have the power to now say, look at what we're doing for you. Is yes, this is change. And yes, this is going to be different, but you're getting paid for this difference because we just lopped off a really big chunk of your paycheck that was going to healthcare. Oh, and by the way, if you call this toll-free number first, then your out-of-pocket expense for whatever, your MRI, your labs, or specialty meds could be waived down to zero. And so we're picking up some extra dollars for you there. So the conversation from the HR perspective is really geared around to is how is it going to impact the member? How is it going to stabilize my employees? Because change is hard, change is disruptive, and you always learn something that you didn't know. Because when you have that many individuals in an organization, something is going to happen. So as long as you can be proactive and just let you know, it's going to be different and it's going to feel different, but these are the reasons why we're doing it, and echo it over and over and over and over again to the membership so they can understand it.
And, and I want to go into like a real life case study outside of this too, but that last thing that you said, I often find that employers and advisors, they talk to people, in a rudimentary way, and they don't talk to them in a factual, like they're a consumer. Like I often think you've got people sitting on the floor on Sundays cutting out 39-cent lima bean coupons, and you think that it's going to be too hard for your employee to call into the advocate and take that recommendation and get a free drug. But meanwhile, they spend their time on the floor cutting out and saving 39-cent coupons. When I think in your example, I just saved them $6,000 on the family, and the people that are using the plan, that yes, you're telling them to take that extra step and call in, but they could save another 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, 15,000. So now you're talking about a combined impact that you can have on a human life of 20 grand. And that might be too hard of a conversation. I don't know, Pete. I get fired up about it because that same individual shops for cars differently. Yeah. They researched the hell out of the flat screen TV that they bought from Best Buy. Yep. But we're scared to ask them to be a better healthcare consumer.
Right.
I don't think we're giving people enough credit.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think if we give them the tools, they will become better healthcare consumers.
I think
And
the
best thing is
financial tool is
making this decision.
I think the financial reality that people are rationing their insulin. People are having to decide. I mean, my parents filed bankruptcy because of health expenses. Like, they were $68,000 on a credit card in debt.
Yeah.
And you're making the decision, does dad get his Revlimid or do we make our rent payment? Well, we make our rent payment on the damn credit card and we take a second on the house to be able to pay it down. Like, these are real things. So somebody's listening and they're curious, right? They got their ears perked up, but they're like, how does this exactly play out? Walk me through a real life example. And I'd love the, what is in it for the WIFM, right? The most popular radio station in the world. What's in it for me, for the employer? But I also want to talk about that member, because I know that you said it earlier. Hey, you like doing employee meetings because you want to stand in front of somebody and look them in the eye and say, if you do this, then you do this. But there is a trade that says you got to do something a little bit different. Talk to me about that whole situation, the employer and the employee.
There's a lot you just came up with.
Hey, you got 5 minutes. Come on.
So where do I start with? So with the employee, just that was the last thing you mentioned. So we always start with the employee first and the member impact first. And the reason is because I agree with you. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between what's actually happening to our members versus what we perceive as happening to our members. Because nobody likes to talk about medical debt. Nobody likes to talk about what happens. Now, you're going to have a few vocal people that are going to complain about stuff, but from the lion's share of the population, we probably don't know what's happening behind the scenes because we're very private individuals. So talking from that perspective is, if we can create an environment where we can give your members some tools so that they can have a better outcome financially, probably, and well, medically as well, because those other studies show that the least expensive providers are generally the more proficient, and the better performing providers are less complications. But it's all about creating the opportunity so that the member can make an individual choice. And that's what I love about these 3-tier plans that we've created, because if you have somebody that is just dead set on doing what they've always done, give them the opportunity to do that. Let them do it. But if you have that, subset of your population that likes to make sure they have the latest iPhone that's coming out and they sleep in a tent, then let's give them the tools so they can waive their out-of-pocket expense. Now, from the employer's perspective, the whole conversation is do you really know what's happening inside your healthcare plan? Do you understand what you're paying for things? Because if you pull back what the CAA did for us, I mean, ERISA has been around since the 70s. We've always had fiduciary responsibilities. It's just the CAA has given us more tools so that we can be more proactive in it. And as soon as that happens, what then? And we get the J&J lawsuit. Well, the J&J lawsuit, it's a class action from the employees. They're talking about excessive costs was inside the medical plan. So let's go back to 2006, right? John Deere had the same thing. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, they were all involved in class action lawsuits from an ERISA perspective because of excess fees inside the 401k plan. And how has that changed our lives? I mean, there's been huge disruption in the 401k markets with understanding what is actually happening inside your plan. Healthcare plans have that same responsibility, and we always get pushback and like, well, I'm a company of 100 lives. I'm probably not going to get sued for that. Well, did you make any process changes in your 401k? Do you have a committee meeting in your 401k to make sure that your fees you're paying and the funds are reasonable? Did you do a process in your 401k to make sure that the returns inside the 401k are reasonable and they're like above benchmarks? Why aren't we doing that with the second largest expense? The 401k contributions are voluntary. Health insurance contributions are mandatory. And so what the conversation was with the employer is, we've always had this responsibility. We now have tools that we can provide that to you and make an educated decision. And I've had companies say, you know what, I'm good. I get I'm paying more over here, but I'm making a decision that's right for my company. Great. But now you're also opening up the conversation with the other folks that are like, this is suffocating me. And if you're telling me that I can reduce my facility expenses by 10 to 15 to 20%, or my out-of-pocket expenses, my outpatient procedures by the same dollar amount, or I can get specialty medications at a fraction of the cost, I mean, insulin. So we're doing a diabetics presentation that's coming up in a month. And I've got one of the guys from the Diabetic Leadership Council that's going to be speaking with me. On the average, 70% of the cost of the insulin is a rebate. Does anybody know that? No. But now if you tell that to an employer who has employees that are diabetics and say, did you know that 70% of the cost of the medication that either you're paying for as an employer, or your employees are paying for as an employee, 70 cents on that dollar is going back to an insurance company and the PBM to their profit margin. Do you remember when we were talking about the stock prices of the insurance companies, the PBMs, and the hospital systems, and how they're all 2 or 3.5 times more than the S&P 500? That's why. And so having this conversation with the employer is that reasonable to you? Is this how you want to have your members treated? Is this how you want to be treated? And would it be okay to redirect those dollars instead of going to the insurance carrier's bottom line? Let's have it go to your bottom line. So that if you have a hotshot that you want to hire away from your competitor and you need a signing bonus, you got some cash for it. Or you want to open up an office in Albuquerque, you've got some cash for it. But let's give that control to you instead of having a default conversation where, man, the insurance company, I got a good renewal, 2%, so let's just take it and put it to bed. We have to change the conversation with the employers to give them more aware of what's happening, to give them more power to make decisions that are right for themselves.
Awesome. Pete, if I know, I talk about this every day, but, ears have perked up if somebody is listening and says, man, my advisor is not having these types of conversations. And in fact, the last renewal came out at 2%, and he absolutely, or she absolutely said, let's just put it to bed, because I know that those words have come out of my mouth before.
Come out of my mouth. I'm as guilty of it too.
And so I know that this is part of it. If somebody wanted to continue a dialogue with you based on something that they heard, where does somebody find out more about Pete or Arcwood? Where can somebody get a hold of you?
Well, our website's probably a good place to start, and it's spelled Arcwood. There's no H's, there's no K's, We always tease that all the good names were gone when we came up with Arcwood. So that would be a good spot. Arcwood, arcwood.com. On there, you're also going to find our phone number. Sales at arcwood.com goes direct to David. David's our Director of Business Development and client. What's the appropriate way of saying it? It's not acquisition, but client happiness. Because he's really changing lives. And I mean, boy, hearing him speak too, because his mom is in the same situation. She spends $700 a month on insurance premium. She has out-of-pocket expenses of $7,000, and she makes $48,000 a year. It's just, so he is a wonderful individual to talk to. So that would probably be the best place to continue the conversations. And if you're an advisor, we work with advisors too. If you want to have help of kind of transitioning into this to find out how it truly works, what the impacts are, I will absolutely have conversations with advisors too.
Awesome. Well, Pete, thank you for breaking down some of those conversations. I think, we never think about where we're going to go right in these conversations. As I think back and like, what's the title of this episode? I look at like the conversation that needs to be had, that needs to be had is what I believe the theme is here. And whether somebody is an employer or an advisor or even an influencer to an employer or advisor, we just had conversations that I know a significant, and I would be willing to bet 95+% of employers don't have this level of conversation where they are taking goals and objectives of an organization by vertical of discipline, HR and whatever, tagging it to what they're doing for their second largest expense, and then thinking of it through the lens of that person who is making $48,000 when we say put it to bed, and that person is having to make the decisions that are being made. Like, it just needs to happen. And so I thank you for shining that light on that conversation.
Yeah. My dad always used to thump me in the back of the head saying, if you're not educated about it, how you can make a decision about it? You at least have to take the initiation, the first step of just learning about.
Awesome. Well, Pete, thanks for being a guest. To the audience out there, thank you so much. The reason we do this, I don't get paid to do this. This is absolutely a passion conversation, and it's because of conversations like this that literally could keep people out of financial ruin, health ruin, and give you a competitive advantage, can spark our economy, can lower our GDP, all of these things are the expense in our GDP that is healthcare. All of the things that are such big opportunities start with one little conversation. So Pete, thanks for shining that light. Thank you for the audience. Please share, please like, please comment. And Pete, we'll see you on the flip side, buddy.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Impact Healthcare, people and strategies that are disrupting the health benefits industry with Lester Morales. Remember, the journey to getting 20% savings on your healthcare benefits starts with total transparency. Remember to subscribe to the Impact Healthcare podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.